My son got out of prison and attacked me because 20 years ago I turned him in to the police for what he had done. He didn't knock. He burst into my workshop like a hurricane. I had just put my plane down on the workbench, the oak shavings still warm in my palm, when he hit me with his forearm and threw me back against the nailboard. Hammers clattered. A jar of brass screws smashed against the concrete, scattering like shot. "Say you're sorry," he hissed. Saliva splattered on my cheek. "Say you're sorry for ruining my life." 20 years had turned Ethan's voice to gravel. He used to have his mother's eyes, clear, bright. "You're alive," I said. That was the point. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. He shoved again. The oak plane slid off the bench and cracked. "No. The point was you wanted to be the hero. You wanted everybody to know William Holt does the right thing. Even when it means handing over his own son, I didn't raise my hands." The cameras in the rafters blinked red, patient. The little light on the unit by the saw winked twice. The front flood would trip in 6 minutes. The call would be placed. I'd rehearsed all this like a man rehearses a fire drill he prays he'll never need. "You killed a man, Ethan," I said. Jacob Ortiz was 23. He had a mother who still sets a plate for him every Sunday. He had a sister who got his college letter in the mail the week after the funeral. I remember all their names. Ethan flinched as if the names themselves burned. Then he laughed without humor. "You always were good with details." "How's this detail? I did 19 years, 8 months, and 3 days because my father marched me to a police station like I was a deer he'd bagged." I walked past the front desk with your hand on my shoulder. Everybody stared. The hero and the animal. "What I remember," I said, "is you sitting at our kitchen table with blood on your knuckles and a steering column in your lap, asking me for my truck so you could disappear, and me deciding to be your father instead of your accomplice." His fist clenched, opened. The scar along his thumb, where glass had opened him the night of the crash, paled with pressure. There were other marks it hadn't had back then. A long, pale seam from bicep to elbow. The kind you get in the yard when a piece of metal goes wrong. A small crown tattoo near his wrist. Jailhouse ink, uneven. He looked older than 39. Prison robs some men of time and leaves it piled in their faces. "You think you saved me?" He stepped back. Rain sound filled the space where we stood. "You cost me everything. Mom died hating you. Aaron left before I was halfway through, and you—" He swallowed the rest like a bitter pill and turned to the bench, sweeping his arm. Files, calipers, pencils, the little dowel jigs I made for the widow on Sycamore Street. They clattered to the floor. He needed to see something break. That was the point of coming here first. Not the house, not the living room, but the shop where he'd followed me at 5 years old, where he'd sanded toy cars and learned how to set a nail. I watched it fall and thought, let him break what I can replace. "I won't fight you, son," I said, and that word made him flinch again, as if it were a trick. "But you won't stay." "Oh," he said, smiling now, showing the tooth he'd chipped sometime inside. "I'm not staying. I'm collecting." He took the cap off. His hair was prison short. "You owe me." "What do I owe you, Ethan?" "Everything you kept for yourself while I ate on trays. The house, the shop, the savings you still have because I wasn't out here using them up. The truck you didn't let me take that night. The 20 years. He leaned close enough for me to smell smoke in his jacket. "And you owe me for the thing you don't know." There it was, the second reason. Prison teaches men how to braid reasons like cables, one good moral thread wrapped around 3 bad ones until they can't be separated easily. The thing I don't know. I kept my face still. "I'll pour coffee," I said. "We'll talk." He snorted. "Old man, you're going to pour money." The floodlight came on outside with a plank of white against the roll-up door. Ethan's eyes flickered toward it. Not long now. I moved slowly, because when a man already has the story of you in his head, coward, tattletale, righteous priest. Any sudden adjustment is proof. I let him see my hands, fingers open, age-spotted. I went to the mini-fridge, reached for the top shelf, and brought out 2 bottles of water. I set one on the bench in front of him. "You remember this shop?" I asked. "Like a place I used to be happy," he said sharply. He didn't take the water. "Before you used me to prove you were a man." "I used the law," I said, "because you used the truck and the whiskey. And because a boy who kills and runs needs a wall that stops him before he ruins every life he touches." He smiled again. "You telling yourself that kept you warm, didn't it? All those lonely years after Mom kicked you out, after you sold the house we grew up in and hid in this little one by the mill. You got to be right every night before bed." "I got to live," I said. That was enough. His face twitched. Truth is rude when it walks into another man's narrative. He turned away, saw the camera above the rafters then, and his shoulders rose. "You taping me, Will?" "Everything in the shop's been recording since 2019, after the break-ins down the road." He stared at the red dot for a long second and smiled in a way that said he'd already accounted for it. "Good," he said. "You'll want the tape." He left with a promise. 2 days, he said from the threshold, rain at his back like curtains. 48 hours to come to your senses. Cash. Or I come back and take what you won't give. "Parole officers love road trips," I said, and he laughed at me like I'd told a small joke. When he was gone, I shut the door and felt the ache in my chest. I'd come to recognize not as a heart attack, but as regret's lingering cousin, the kind that sleeps in the guest room and eats your groceries. I swept screws into a pan and told my hands to stop shaking, then sat on the stool by the lathe and let myself breathe. There is a particular loneliness only the father of a son can name, the kind you feel when you watch your boy step into the fire you've spent your life keeping from your face. My phone buzzed. The screen lit with 2 names, Ortiz Scholarship Board, and then a second later, Carla O., Jacob's sister. It wasn't coincidence. Wednesdays I checked on the fund. Wednesdays Carla called to confirm receipts and ask about the woodwork I was donating for the fall auction. Wednesdays were penance on a calendar. I let the first call go and took the second. "Carla," I said. "Mr. Holt," she replied, still formal after all these years. Time makes odd friends of us. "We're confirmed for Saturday?" "The church basement?" "Yes. And Carla, he's back." Her breath caught. "I heard. The detective called last week. Said release was scheduled. They had no cause to hold. He came today." "Are you okay?" "I'm old and slower, but I'm okay." "I'd like a copy of Jacob's photo, the one from graduation, for Saturday's table." "Of course." We were quiet a moment. There are silences you earn. "You did right," she said, as she always said when she could hear the doubt opening its mouth. "I did what I had," I said, as I always answered. Then I told her the rest, the 48 hours, the demand, the tone in his voice when he said, "the thing you don't know." "Do you think he means another crime?" Carla's voice tightened. "Something they didn't charge him for?" "I don't know," I said, "but I intend to find out." Before we hung up, she said, "If you need someone with you on Saturday, I'll stand." I thanked her and looked at the little clock I'd screwed to the wall over the shelf where I keep my sandpaper. 46 hours and change now. I'd anticipated rage, a demand for forgiveness I couldn't give, the attempt to climb inside my house as if he still had a bedroom here. I had not expected a countdown, and the words about a thing I didn't know had nested in my ribs like a swallow finding rafters. I did the thing I do when the world shakes. I sharpened tools. There is something about a clean edge and a wheel's patient hum that returns a man to himself. By the time the chisels shined like flat lakes, The shakes in my fingers were gone. Then I called the lawyer. "You kept the trust irrevocable?" I asked, voice calm in the quiet office air I could hear through the phone. "As of last month," George said. "House, shop, the savings, and the pension are in the trust. You're trustee, with Carla as successor. Ethan isn't a beneficiary and cannot be. Even if you die, he has no standing." "And the POA?" I asked. "Medical and financial both assigned to your brother and then Carla in that order. Ethan has no legal access to anything of yours, now or upon your death." "And if I were to record him asking me for money in exchange for not inflicting harm?" George exhaled softly. "Don't prompt him. Let him speak. And, William, call Detective Harville." "I intended to," I said. It was Harville who had first come to our house 20 years ago, hat in his hand, to tell me a young man had been killed at the corner of Bluebird and Pine when a stolen Dodge ran the light and cut him in half against a bus stop bench. It was Harville who had said, "The driver's bleeding, left thumb most likely." They always are, from the steering column. And it was that sentence that pressed me out of my chair at the kitchen table and sent me to Ethan's room to find him on the carpet, glass on his knuckles. "You could have lied then," George had told me more than once in the years since, when the trust papers were drawn and redrawn, when the house was sold, when my wife moved into a rental on the other side of town. "You could have said nothing." Men do, I'd said. Fathers can't." Now I hung up with George, called Harville, and left a message with his receptionist. Then I drove to the church basement and checked the folding tables. It's funny the things a man does to hold shape. I counted chairs. I checked the outlets for the coffee pots. I stood where I knew Carla and Jacob's mother would stand and looked at the wall for something that might offend them. When I returned to the shop at dusk, the lights were on in my kitchen. For one odd second, I had the feeling you get when you think you've left something dangerous running: the stove, the iron, the saw. Then I saw Ethan's shadow move across the curtain and understood he had already learned my habits and circled them like a dog learning a yard. I didn't go in. I walked past the kitchen window soft as a man walks past a deer. I went to the side gate, let myself into the narrow space between the hedges and the house, and crouched beneath the bathroom window. It was open an inch. The vented glass in our old place on Linden had taught me to recognize the exact sound of voices sliding through bathroom windows. Now I heard his, lower, threatening, and another, a man's voice I did not know. "Older than I expected," the stranger said. "He's rich in the only way that matters," Ethan answered. "Property, insurance. The shop's his church. He'll sell the pews if I tell him they're cursed." "You sure the trust can't block it?" "Trust is a piece of paper," Ethan said. "People are easier to move than paper, especially guilty ones." The man laughed. It was a short, trained sound, the kind that belongs to somebody who likes other people's money. "And this thing he doesn't know?" Ethan paused. I could hear him opening my refrigerator, the same cheap hinge squeal I keep meaning to fix. A bottle cap popped. He leaned his weight against my counter. "He thinks I did 1980 because I stole a car and ran a light." "That what you did?" I heard the smile. "That's what I got caught for. The rest, he doesn't know. He doesn't know about the witness at the bus stop. He doesn't know I went back to get the ring off the kid's finger for Aaron." He laughed, soft, ugly. "Didn't come off. Had to cut." The world in the hedges went silent the way the world does when a hawk passes. Even the mosquitoes seemed to hang motionless under the eaves. Jacob Ortiz's file had said, "No personal effects recovered." The night clerk at the liquor store had said he heard a scream and then the long sound of tires. The detective had told me the bus bench twisted like tinfoil. No paper had told me about a ring. No report had mentioned a witness other than the clerk. But I had seen the white cross on Bluebird with a rosary tied around it, And now I understood why the rosary's beads had been glass instead of the wood his mother favored. "Clock's ticking," the stranger said finally. "It's always ticking," Ethan answered. "He's got 2 days to give me a reason not to tell him what he'll never sleep through." They moved then. Chairs scraped. I ghosted back out to the hedges. On my way past the kitchen window, I stopped. On the sill above the sink is a row of small things that don't matter to anyone else. A pine cone from a trip Margaret and I took when Ethan was 6. A flat stone from Lake Superior, carried home in my pocket for luck. A tiny clock that loses 5 minutes a day. I looked at those foolish trophies, then at my son standing in my light, and filed the shape of that moment somewhere I knew I'd need it later. Detective Harville called back just after dawn. "You woke me up," he said cheerfully, and I could hear the scrape of a chair, the hush of a kitchen radio playing the farm report. He'd retired 3 years after Ethan's sentencing, but men like Harville never stopped taking notes. "You don't call unless you've got a nail you want hammered." "I need to give you a recording," I said, and told him about the bathroom window in the ring. I watched my neighbor Mr. Cranford walk his old spaniel down the block, the dog stopping at every hydrangea with grave ceremony. "You put the bathroom window on tape?" Harville asked. "I put everything on tape," I said. "But the bathroom's one of those old louvered units, sound only." "Good enough." He paused. "William, how do you want this to end? You want him hauled in on a parole violation and whatever new charge we can hang on him? Or you want something different?" "I want him stopped," I said. "And I want Jacob's mother to hear what he took so she can put the right cross on her boy." Harville was quiet for a long time. "What he took is a piece of a soul," he said finally. "There's not a cross in the world for that." "You asked me what I want," I said. "I want my son not to hurt anybody else. I want the truth to be something that doesn't rattle in its case when I drive by Bluebird." "And you want to keep yourself alive," Harville said. "I saw his intake file. He's coming in hot. Then we do it clean." I told him about the 48 hours, about the demand, about the man with him. "I can bait him. I can get him to talk again. He wants to hurt me with the secret. All I have to do is tell him I'm ready to buy it." "You sure you're a father?" Harville said. "Because that's a detective's sentence." "I'm both," I said. "You made me both 18 years ago. We settled on a place, Murph's Diner, the kind of place men like me still meet because there's coffee that tastes like coffee and bacon that tastes like a life you used to have." "Wear the recorder," Harville said. "If he confesses to anything new, we take him. If he threatens, we take him. And if he touches you, call 911 first, me second." "You'll be near?" "You'll never see me," he said, and I believed him. Some men retire from the badge. Some carry the badge as quietly as a carpenter carries a pencil behind his ear. Ethan arrived at Murph's wearing a tan jacket and a smirk that said he'd slept poorly and wanted to hand the bill to somebody else. He took the corner booth with his back to the wall and watched me cross the floor like a man reading weather. "Nice place," he said without looking around. "Coffee's good," I said, and the waitress poured it like she'd been born doing it. 2 days, Ethan said when she left. "You have my money?" "I have questions," I replied, "and an offer." He leaned back. In the light of morning, the prison cuts were less dramatic and the lines around his mouth were deeper. He was handsome in the exact way I had been handsome at 39 if you took the kindness out. "Let's hear the sermon," he said. "I know about the ring," I said quietly. "I know about the witness. I know you went back." The smallest muscle under his left eye jumped. He recovered quickly. Men learned to, but the flinch was there, like a bubble rising in old paint. "Do you?" he said softly. "You sure you want to know that?" "You told me you had something I didn't know," I said. "I want to know it all, and then I want you to go away." "And the money?" "Tell me everything," I said. "All of it. The name of the man you were with last night. The reason you need this money now. The people who'll come for you if I don't pay. Tell me why you went back for a dead boy's ring, and then I'll give you $10,000 to leave this county and never come back." He stared, so still it was like watching a photograph consider responding. 10, he said finally. 20 years of... "I'm not buying back years," I said. "I'm buying a quiet road for the people who still live on Bluebird. And I'm buying time for Jacob's mother to sleep." His jaw worked. He looked down at the table and traced a circle on the formica with the rim of the cup. When he looked up again, something like curiosity had joined the anger in his eyes. "You know why I went back?" he said slowly. "Because Erin cried. She cried and said, 'You promised me a ring that looks like fire.' We were kids. I still thought you could trade shame for gold." He laughed. It was a wrecked sound. The kid was on the bench, half under it. He had his hands. He stopped. "It wouldn't come. I didn't have the nerves for it. My hands shook too much. I left it and ran and threw up behind the tire shop." His fingers flexed open on the table. The waitress passed. He closed them again. "The man last night, his name's Devon Reese. He runs things for a guy who runs things for a guy who thinks he runs things." He smiled without humor. "Prison doesn't give you a last name so much as a chain of command. I took on debt inside for protection, because you make enemies when they think you're a snitch with a cop for a father. I wasn't a cop. You played one at the station door." He sipped, made a face at the coffee like a man who doesn't deserve a good thing. "Debt's due," he said. "Devon needs a lump. He thinks you have one." "I don't," I said, and that was mostly true. The trust had value, but liquid cash was for groceries and church coffee and oil changes. "What you have," he said softly, "is a terror that will pay. I can squeeze that the way saints squeeze blood from statues." "Tell me about the witness," I said. He tilted his head. I recognized the expression. As a boy, he used to make it when he thought I was asking for something he could turn into leverage. "I didn't touch a witness. Not human, anyway." The clerk behind the counter said he couldn't see anything through the neon. Somebody walked out of the liquor store to look. He saw my face. He looked at me like a teacher waiting for me to tell the truth. And I ran. "So there's no one," I said, half hearing the small recorder under my shirt humming its little electric hum. "There's you," he replied. "There's always you. Ask about the ring because you want to make it hurt enough to justify what you did. You handed me over because I was a rabid dog, and then you locked yourself in a kennel of your own. You think I don't know about the scholarship? The memorial plaques? The church coffee? All your penance where people can see it. You could have visited me once. You know that? Once. You could have come and said, 'Son, tell me you're sorry.' You didn't. You left me to rot and then watered flowers downtown." He slid out of the booth suddenly, standing so fast the cup rattled. 10,000, he said. 48 hours, or I cut out your piece the way I couldn't get that ring." He leaned down close enough that I could count the stubble on his jaw. "And don't call your old cop," he said softly. "Devon has cousins in dispatch. I'll hear before you hang up." He walked out. Harville's hat rose briefly behind the pie case, like a small, quiet treaty gesture. The waitress refilled my cup until it overflowed. "Sir," she said gently, blotting at the spill with a handful of napkins, eyes not meeting mine. "You want me to box you some eggs to go? You look like you could use something hot." "Thank you," I said, and pressed money into her palm that she tried not to see. At home, I sat in the shop with the recorder on the bench and the tape from the bathroom on my laptop. I listened to Ethan say "cut" 3 times until the word stopped being a word and became a gate I had to walk through. Then I called Carla. "I need you to be at the church Saturday," I said. "No matter what I say between now and then." "I already planned to be," she said. "What happened?" "He's going to try to make me choose a smaller sin," I said. "He's going to say if I pay him, he'll keep the worst truths in his mouth." I'm not going to pay. He'll come for you. I reckon so, I said, using a word I'd only used before when I wanted to sound like my father. Steady, unmovable, half mule. Harville will take him if he has a reason. I'll give him one. What can I do? She asked. Bring Jacob's ring, I said, then closed my eyes at the silence on the line. Forgive me. That was cruel. I don't know why I said it. There is no ring. I bought him one with his first paycheck, she said softly, surprising me. We chose it together. Silver with a little notch. He wore it on a chain because his fingers swell. After the funeral, I dreamed I saw it in the grass every night for a month. Every time I bent to pick it up, it disappeared. I'm sorry, I said. I'm cruel when I'm cornered. You're human, she said, and her voice was the sound of a woman who had run out of rocks to throw and found water. Night fell on the second day like a curtain in a theater that doesn't have enough staff to raise it slowly. I could feel Ethan's deadline in the way I filled my kettle, in the way I checked the lock on the side gate twice instead of once. I put the house in the dark and sat in the workshop with only the window facing the alley open to the summer air. Somewhere on Maple Street, a teenager laughed the way a teenager laughs when the world is still too wide to understand. At 10:14 p.m., somebody tested the handle on the side gate. At 10:15, the kitchen window creaked. At 10:16, a silhouette filled the doorway between house and shop. Lights, Ethan said, and flipped the switch hard enough to pop the breaker. I stood. He took 3 steps inside and stopped. He wasn't alone. A thinner man with sharp cheeks and eyes that had never been taught to be kind followed him in. Devon Reese, by the look of him, hair clipped tight, jaw wired with the kind of tension you get from meth or too much gym under bad lights. This the church, Devon said, looking around. Where we pass the plate. You didn't use the front door, I said. Devon smiled. Saints use front doors. Debt collectors prefer the back. Ethan's eyes moved immediately to the cameras and then to the breaker panel. He flipped another switch. The red dots died. You learned something, I said. Good. 10, Ethan said. I have 5, I said. Cash. For groceries. The rest is locked where you can't touch it. Devon's smile vanished. You're wasting our night, old man. He's lying, Ethan said quietly. He keeps a cigar box. Top shelf behind the planer blades. He thinks because he hides cash like old men hide cookies, nobody will think to look in the obvious. You searched my shop, I said, and Ethan didn't blink. Devon moved to the shelf like a man walking to a dog bowl. The cigar box was there. He set it on the bench, lifted the lid, and snorted at the stack of hundreds inside. Usually, he said, this is where the old man says, that's for emergencies. He counted quickly. Looks like an emergency to me. Ethan was watching me, not the money. You knew we'd come, he said. You left the window unlatched. Yes, I said. Why? So I could choose where it happens, I said. And that was the truth. There is a dignity in choosing your ground. If a man is going to be beaten, let him pick the floor he will bleed on. I had sharpened chisels and cleaned the vise. I had stacked wood where it wouldn't trip the EMTS. Ethan's mouth moved in a shape that might have been surprise or contempt. Devon slid the box into his jacket and patted it once the way men pat their inside pockets to comfort themselves. That's 5, Devon said. We're missing 5. That's all there is, I said. Take it and leave. Or we... Devon glanced at Ethan. We look for the safe. No safe, I said. Only the trust. And a man with a phone in his pocket, who can press a single button. I let my thumb rest on the SOS key. Ethan's eyes flicked down. The world held its breath for one full second. Then he stepped forward and with a surprisingly gentle motion pressed my hand against the bench. "Don't," he said, and for just the briefest moment there were tears in his eyes like dew on iron. "Don't make me be this thing in front of you." "Then don't be it," I said. He let my hand go like he was releasing a problem he couldn't do arithmetic on, then turned and punched the pegboard. A hammer bounced and clanged on the floor. "Get it together," Devon said. "You told me Daddy would play." "Daddy is playing," Ethan said, voice gone flat. "He'll call the cops and solve this like a crossword." Devon took a step toward me and made a mistake men like him often make with men like me. He assumed age is the same thing as absence. He reached for my shirt to shove me back and present his intimidation like a piece of theater. When his hand touched my collar, I pressed the SOS. The house alarm screamed. The side flood sprang alive and turned the shop white. The camera above the breaker hummed to life on its own battery, a last little eye I'd bought from a man in the church parking lot who installs such things and believes in redundancy. Devon swore and swung his eyes toward the door. Ethan's head snapped toward the sound of sirens that were already too close to have been called just now. Harville had been patient down the block in an unmarked sedan that looked like all old sedans do, presence without glamour. Devon moved first because of course he did. He ducked for the side gate. 2 deputies met him in the alley, one with a taser, one with a voice that left no room for sermon or compromise. He went down like a man remembering a different electricity. Ethan didn't move. He stood there with the alarm shivering the air and the light making his pupils pinpricks and looked at me. "You planned this," he said. "I prepared," I said. "There's a difference." He stepped closer until I could see the tiny stitches at the corner of his mouth where someone had once split him. His voice dropped. "You going to do it again?" Led me into the bright. "I'm going to ask you a question," I said. "Then we'll both walk out." "Ask." "Why did you tell me about the ring?" He blinked. For the first time all week I saw my boy inside the man who'd learned to count days by the sound of locks. "Because you won't sleep until you picture it," he said. "And if I have to walk back in, I want you to be there with me." "That's not mercy," I said. "It's company," he said. "Ethan," I said, and I meant to say something like "come with me" or "stop" or "God help us both," but the deputies filled the doorway like door frames and the alarm died with a last lonely beep. "Hands," Harville said, voice as tired as the Bible. "Let me see your hands." Ethan raised them. He looked at me while they turned him, like a boy looks at his father when he's about to be punished. Defiance and plea mixed into something no language worth speaking distinguishes. As they led him through the side gate, he said, without turning around, "Tell Mom I tried." "Your mother's gone," I said. He laughed, then hard. "She's never gone," he said, and disappeared into the blue. The plea hearing came fast because parole violations come fast. The felony counts took longer to form, haltingly, like a child learning how to name what hurts. Extortion is a word that requires paper. Threats are words that require witnesses. We had both. I didn't attend the bail hearing. I had a table to lay out at the church basement. The white cloth wouldn't sit straight. I smoothed it again and again until Carla arrived and pressed her palms down on the wrinkles. "Enough," she said gently. "It's a church, not a hotel, not a—" People came with photographs and stories they hadn't had the courage to tell when grief was too loud. Jacob's varsity coach. His mother, hair thinner than last year, hands steady as she poured coffee. A girl he'd tutored in math who had 3 kids now, and a job at the hospital, and still kept the notebook he'd drawn little equations in with stars for the ones she solved. I stood behind the table and handed out programs with his picture. It was the same one I'd asked for. An almost man in a cap that shadowed his eyes. The ring chain was visible if you knew where to look. I didn't look long. After the program, when the last of the cookies were smuggled out in napkins and the coffee urns gurgled like grateful old men, Carla touched my sleeve. I have something, she said. In the utility closet, with the mop and the extra chairs and the smell of pine sol thick enough to remember school, she handed me a small box. Inside was a silver ring, notched on a chain. It's not his, she said quickly. It's a duplicate. The jeweler remembered the order. I had him make another one. I can look at it instead of closing my eyes and trying to remember. Here. She closed my fingers around the chain. Wear it until you do what you have to do. Then give it back to me. I wore it under my shirt like a man wears a small stone to remind his back how to stand. 2 days before the arraignment on the new charges, Ethan's public defender called me. He wants a meet, she said. Victim offender, supervised, correction center. I'm not his victim, I said. You are now, she said. And you were 20 years ago whether you wrote yourself into the story that way or not. I went because there are rooms a father owes a son. It was gray and colder than a room that size had any right to be. Ethan sat at the far end of a table with 2 guards who looked like men who dreamed in steel. The defender took a seat between us. A counselor sat at the head with a yellow legal pad and a soft voice. Ethan, she said, why did you ask for this? He leaned back, knees bouncing, so I could say my piece with someone to keep him from making a speech. The counselor looked at me. William, she said, why did you agree? Because he asked, I said. Ethan snorted. That's always been your problem, he said. You always do what a man in a uniform asks. You asked, I said. You're not wearing a uniform. Not yet, he said. The counselor's pen made a soft scratching sound. Ethan, she said, what do you want to tell your father? Ethan shrugged. The bounce in his knee slowed. He looked at my shirt as if he could see the chain. I wanted to tell him that it was easy to be brave 20 years ago, he said quietly, because he thought the worst thing that could happen to me was a cell. He didn't think about the kind of men who teach you how to be a better monster. He didn't picture me sitting at a table like this in a place like that hearing the word Dad and having it mean nothing but the sound boots make in a hall. I pictured you alive, I said. He nodded once. And I am, he said. He looked up. For now. The counselor looked at me again, gentler. William. I wanted to tell him, I said, that I have thought about that night longer than he was alive before he had it, that I have rehearsed the moment he said, Dad, please, more times than there are nails in the beams of our old house. I wanted to tell him that I built a scholarship in a dead boy's name so the circle would stretch and not just close. I wanted to tell him I still hear his mother's footsteps in the kitchen from the night she left. And I wanted to ask him, is there anything in you that is sorry for Jacob? His mouth worked. After a long time he said, I am sorry I got caught. The counselor's pen stopped. I didn't know if she wrote that phrase on her pad or carved it into the table. We sat there for another half hour, saying things men say when they have already said the things that matter. When I rose to leave, Ethan said, If I ask you for a favor, will you do it? No, I said automatically, and his mouth twitched in what might have, in another life, become a smile. It's not money, he said. Devon's brothers will come looking. If they come to you, don't give them my ware. I don't know your ware, I said. Good, he said. Keep it that way. The hearing was a calendar appointment without drama. The arrest for extortion carried its own wheels. The parole violation held him until the wheels turned. Devon pled to a lesser count, eyes dead even when the judge said, gladly, the way you do when you think you've gotten away with something the world won't notice. I testified. The cameras made fine witnesses. The bathroom recorder made a better one. When Ethan's lawyer tried to suggest the ring conversation was theater, the judge's eyebrows lowered the way barn doors lower in storms. You asked for this meet, the judge said to Ethan. You wanted to speak. When he didn't, she continued, voice like steel rails. Then you can listen. I have read thousands of words about fathers and sons in rooms like this. Most of them are excuses. Some of them are letters. This is evidence. And this is a father who did what other fathers would not. You don't have to like him, but you will respect what he saved you from. When it ended, I expected to feel something that would make a sentence for men like me. Relief or justice. I felt neither. I felt like a man who has pushed a boulder up a small hill and watched it settle in the exact place gravity wanted it to settle anyway. Outside in the hall, Harville leaned against the wall like a man leaning on a fence. "You look like a man who needs coffee," he said. "I look like a man who needs to go back to fixing the leg on Mrs. Henderson's chair," I said. "That too," he said and clapped my shoulder. "You did right." "Don't say that to me today," I said. "Say it to Carla in 10 years, if she ever sleeps all the way through." He nodded. "I will." Autumn came early that year. The air had the taste of metal by September. On a Tuesday, I stood at Bluebird and Pine at 6:30 a.m. with a broom and a small bucket and swept grit from the base of the white cross that still leaned against the fence. Carla's mother met me there, hands in her cardigan pockets, and told me about the dream she'd had the night before. Jacob sitting at their kitchen table wearing a college sweatshirt, asking if there was more coffee. "We never had mugs in the house big enough for that boy," she said, "and we laughed like you laugh at a story you've already told too many times to be funny." I drove home by the old mill and watched a new crew hang a sign that said, "Loft's coming soon. Time's a carpenter that tears down as often as he builds." In the shop, a small package waited on the bench. No return address. Inside was a copy of The Grapes of Wrath and a torn photograph. The photograph showed Ethan at 12 with a fish he'd caught at the reservoir. He had my hat on in the same proud, ridiculous stance boys adopt when they think their fathers are bigger than the world. On the back of the photo, in my ex-wife's careful script, a single sentence. He learned it somewhere. I set the picture on the shelf beside the pine cone in the stone. Then I took the ring chain from around my neck, kissed the metal once, a foolish old man's reflex, and walked it to Carla's house, where the smell of onions and cumin drifted from the kitchen like the smell of love with pots under it. "Keep it," she said when I held it out. "Not forever. Just for the next time you go to the corner of Bluebird. It's good sometimes to carry a piece of what you survived." "Did I survive it?" I asked. It was a real question. "You did," she said, "because you didn't make it smaller. You made it bear the weight it had. Winter rides your shoulders harder in an old house. You learn where the drafts poke. You learn where the floorboards gossip. My shop stays warmer than the kitchen, and most nights I end up sleeping in the chair beside the stove, a blanket over my knees, the TV talking softly to itself across the hall. It was after midnight when the knock came. 3 soft taps that would have been gentle if they weren't at that hour. I stood with the blanket around my shoulders and listened a second time to make sure it wasn't the wind in the downspout, then opened the door. A boy stood on my porch, 17 maybe, a face like a map if you knew how to read the marks, high school fights, a poor shave with a cheap blade, the haunted stare of a kid who hasn't been told the truth all the way through yet. He held a paper bag in one hand like it was a prayer. "You William Holt?" he asked. "I am," I said. "I'm Mason," he said. "My mom is Erin." He shifted from foot to foot. "He said to tell you I'm not him." For a moment I couldn't decide which he meant. Then I saw Ethan's mouth in the boy's. It hit like a remembered blow. "He asked me to bring you this," the boy said quickly, as if saying the words fast would keep whatever they carried from spilling. He handed me the bag. Inside was the cigar box, heavier than it had been last time I touched it. "I don't want his money," I said automatically. "It's not," the boy said, shrugging, hands in the pockets of a jacket too thin for the night. "It's mine. The 5 he took. I work at the body shop on Walnut after school. Cash for the till." I thought it was a good joke. Then I heard he looked at the floor. He said you'd know what to do with it. I do, I said. I thought of the Ortiz scholarship. I thought of a new coffee urn for the church basement. I thought of the corner of Bluebird. Thank you. I'm not him, he said again, stubborn. You can tell by the way I shake when I hold a cigarette. He never shakes. He told me that like it was a good thing. You got a steady hand? I asked. For paint, he said. Pinstripes. Come by the shop Saturday morning, I said. I've got a rocker that needs a careful hand. You ever French polish walnut? He looked confused and then hopeful. It is a thing I have learned only lately. Hope looks like confusion when it is new in a boy. I'll come, he said. He turned to go, then paused. He told me to tell you one more thing, he said. He swallowed, eyes shinier than a boy wants them to be in a strange man's doorway. He said, tell him I'm sorry I didn't know how. He walked down my steps and into air so cold it ate his breath. I stood in the doorway until the draft convinced me to close it. Spring pried the winter off one stubborn nail at a time. The mill became lofts with windows so big you could change your season by turning your head. Mrs. Henderson's chair got a new leg. I taught Mason how to lay shellac like you whisper a story to wood that's waiting to believe in its own beauty. On a Sunday afternoon, I drove to Bluebird and left the cigar box open under the cross with a note, for coffee and books and small mercies. Carla's mother called me that night and said, I saw your handwriting. We didn't speak for a long time. When we did, it was to argue about whether the new urn should be stainless steel or one of those fancy copper ones that burn old men's fingers. It felt like a sacrament disguised as nonsense. In late June, I stood in the church basement and watched the senior scholar sign his acceptance to a state school. He wore a silver ring on a chain. It caught the light. I didn't look away. I let it lay the picture it wanted to lay in my mind. I let it sit there. After the ceremony, I went home and planed a length of oak until a curl lay on the bench like a ribbon. When the wood was glass under my palm, I set down the tool and looked at the pegboard. The hammer marks from Ethan's fist were still there, tiny moons. I left them. There are men who tidy scars until they look like nothing happened. I'm not that kind anymore. I sleep with the chain sometimes cupped in my hand and the house quiet like a held breath. When the wind off Maple Street catches the eaves, the cameras blink. Patient little eyes, waiting, as always, for a reason to remember. I don't wait anymore. I make coffee. I open the door when boys knock. I stand at corners and sweep grit. When people ask me now, because they do, in quieter ways than they used to, if I regret the walk I made 20 years ago through a lobby that smelled like wax and loss, with my son at my side and my hand on his shoulder, I tell them the truth that fits the shape of a life. Regret isn't a thing you can spend to buy back a different day. It's the tool you sharpen to keep the edge you need for the next hard cut. And when men my age ask the other question, the one they can't say without the word boy getting stuck to their teeth, I tell them another truth. A father's job isn't to keep his hands clean. It's to stand in the doorway when the house is on fire and choose who gets to breathe. The door is still there. The fire never really leaves. And some nights I hear boots in a hall in a place I can't get to, and I put my palm flat on the table until the tremor passes. But on Saturdays, a boy with a steady hand pinstripes a rocker in my shop. He asks questions careful as cuts, about wood and women and work, and what to do with money you didn't make yourself. I answer the ones I can. I teach him to wait for shellac to whisper back, to stop sanding before he turns beauty into dust. On the wall above the bench, a photo in a cheap frame shows a kid at a reservoir with a fish and a hat too big for his head. His father took the picture. The sun that day fooled both of them into believing it would always be warm. It isn't. But there are days, Days rich with coffee and ring shines and the sound of a brush moving slow on walnut, when it comes close enough to count as mercy.
My grandpa's worst really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.